Hi, my name is Will Brown. I'm an associate professor at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. I'm also the director of the Nonprofit Management Program and help put together the Emerging Leaders in Public Service. Let me give you just a brief overview of what this program entails. But first, just want to reference some of the excellent faculty and staff that help bring this off. Dominic Bearfield is an associate professor and does a session on double loop learning. Joe Cerami and Holly Kasperbauer are with the Public Service Leadership Program here at the Bush School. Joe does a session on the Individual Leadership Development Plan. Holly is instrumental in the assessments and helps process that material. Rebecca serves as the lifeblood of the program and helps weave it and keep it all together and make sure everybody's on the right page. I think with that staff and with this program elements that are defined here, individuals come out of here with a good sense of their own style, of who they are, as well as a pretty concrete basis of a planning element to be able to say, hey, I think I know what some of the things I need to do next in reference to my own leadership development. We start off with some basic definitions about what do we mean by leadership, how are we defining this, and what does it mean for you. Move into two different self-assessment programs, a session on double loop learning, as I mentioned, and the Individual Leadership Development Plan. Let me talk through each one of these. So we open the program up with a conversation around leadership. What does it mean to you? And we always have a really good conversation looking at some of these definitions. Four that capture different aspects of what it means to be a leader, from a very simple definition provided by Drucker or Maxwell to more nuanced framing from Bennis or Gardner. And we asked the participants to think a little bit about the extent to which there are things missing, which one do you like, which one resonates with you, what are you thinking about, and then of particular importance, and we want to move fairly quickly to, is the sense about what skills do you need. What skills are you good at? What skills could you get better at? Where are you in your organization, and what opportunities are confronting you now? And in what way can you improve or be more effective as a leader? And so one of the ways that we talk about skills is I introduce this strategic leadership functions basically within an organization. It's built on a theoretical model or an empirical model that talks about multiple major functions of strategic management, which are listed down here on the right-hand side, which talks about sort of defining and understanding the operating context, what's happening, where are we operating, what do we anticipate to be able to accomplish, what are the systems and capabilities of our organization to be able to do that, and how do we know that we've been able to be effective, and what do we need to learn so that we can continue to grow and be a more effective organization. That then suggests a number of roles or a number of places that leaders can be instrumental, and then each one of these boxes is indicative of what the literature talks about as being some pretty important functions in public service organizations. Public benefit being this idea of defining the why and clarifying the purpose of the organization. Strategic direction having to do with creating a plan, but also prioritizing and engaging individuals, as well as alignment. And external orientation having to do with sort of an understanding of the resource environment, the social environment, the cultural environment in such a way as to be able to understand how to be able to get the resources you need, as well as to be able to have the impact that you want to be able to have in your organization. The four boxes across the middle there reflect slightly more internal elements in the way managers and leaders want their organizations to run, and some things that can be a roles or important functions that managers fulfill. Ensuring ethical practices, think how that happens, what are the structures that are in place, what are the decision rubrics that we create so that it makes it easier for us to operate in an ethical way. Organizational culture, what features are important, how do you create a culture that allows for accountability, performance, all kinds of elements there. Resources, how do you make sure that you take full advantage of volunteers, the money that you have, the space that you have, and how do you engage people inside the organization and outside the organization in this collaborative orientation. And then the the last box there has to do with controls, and in what way do you set in place sufficient controls and mechanisms to foster accountability. Obviously a lot there, a lot to talk about. We give them a reading associated with this, and then we ask individuals to prioritize one of these, and we drill down just a little bit in one of them after providing that brief overview that I just gave you. Then we've got two self-assessments, the Strengths Quest, which focuses in on talents and your abilities. It's a pretty comprehensive assessment. I think there's over 40 strengths that are assessed, and they give back 5 of them. And then, of course, there are categories of these, and we look at these in the workshops and talk through what they are, help people understand them more, help understand the strengths and the limitations of those, the benefits of these talents, and then beginning to talk about this idea of how do you utilize them or come to terms with these are your sort of preferred ways that you might approach work and others, and coming to terms with what it means to sort of not always be looking at where are my weaknesses and what are my limitations, but rather how to be able to exploit your strengths. The other assessment is the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator. It has these 4 dimensions, which results in 16 personality types. Many folks are familiar with this. The introverted versus the extroverted. Where do I gain my energy, and what's my ideal opportunity? Do I like to be introspective and reflective, or am I more verbal and outgoing in the way that I approach things? How do I process information? Am I more sensitive or thinking about this or sensing, and versus a more internal, intuitive kinds of elements? Intellectual, I guess, might be the other word that's used. Decision making, how do I approach decision making? How do I structure my decisions and my opportunities? And what do I have to do with versus sort of planning? Putting these together gives us 16 personality types, and individuals usually resonate quite well with talking about what they are versus what you are, and what that implication is for me as a manager, as a supervisor, and how can I be more effective dealing with people who frame the issue or frame the process in a way that's really substantively different from the way that I approach it. So helping individuals understand themselves and understand others is a pretty important and critical feature in reference to what it means to be an effective leader. The double loop learning is an interesting process for folks. It's a little bit non-traditional, and it can throw some folks off just a little bit, because typically at this point, many of these emerging leaders are quite effective at single loop problem solving, and their tendency is to see a problem and solve it, but also a lot of external oriented kind of framing. You've got a problem, let me help you solve that problem. This context is problematic partly because of something outside of myself. And the double loop learning is an attempt to try and get people to think a little bit about their own, the way that they contribute to dysfunctional interactions in the workplace. Everybody's supposed to bring in a challenge, and then there's some group time for individuals to talk about their challenge, and opportunity for the group to help them process that and think about it a little bit. And inevitably, people can at times feel defensive about this idea that we're asking that question. Well, how's that working for you? It's not all that optimal in many ways. You're bringing in a challenge. I joke a little bit about this as sort of our Dr. Phil moments, where we're pushing people to think about what does this mean for you and the way that you might need to change your behavior to be more productive or more useful, or to be able to overcome some of these challenges. The program concludes with the Individual Leadership Development Plan, which is a pretty comprehensive in many ways, Joe Cerami and the Leadership Development Program here have put together a world-class element that captures many of the features that we might think about in personal development. It's based on these features here, where you start with values, attributes, skills, and knowledge, and begins to give you a framing here to be able to say, okay, what are my values? What's my vision, which will be our next slide that we'll talk a little bit about. What's my ultimate goal, and then how are these elements, this pyramid here, as elements of the individual, how do those play themselves out in who I am? What can I work on? What am I good at? Again, the strengths, the weaknesses, the preferences, those kinds of things. So it starts with a personal vision statement. Sometimes people refer to this as a mantra. So thinking a little bit about what is my goal, or what do I see myself being? So one of the ways that I kind of frame who I am is talking about preparing professionals to be public servants. What does that mean? And the way that then I translate down that pyramid, working through what my values are, the way I approach that, I work through each one of those has implications for the way that I achieve and fulfill that objective associated with my purpose and motivates me. And so this is sort of getting people to think a little bit about, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? Tell me a little bit about what some of those core features are, and then begin to work their way down the pyramid. So we think about values, what things are particularly important to you. Do you find, and again, this is where self-assessment can be of use. We try to prioritize a short list, and again, it has to do with our life stage. So at different points in our life, we might have other kinds of values that are particularly important to us, faith or what have you. And so we ask them to prioritize a few value statements about who they are, and then think a little bit about the way that you want to act. What are the attributes that you bring to interactions, and the way that you do that? So they can imagine there's quite a bit of reflection and conversation about the way people approach. We approach things in different kinds of ways, and the way that you are, and we touch on this idea of emotional intelligence. What is that? How do you improve that? And your orientation in reference to the way that you act, and thinking about how you might need to change, right? What skills do I have? Talk a little bit about differing levels of skills, more technical skills versus conceptual skills, human resource skills, etc. So there's a variety. We've got a couple of lists that we help people to prompt them to begin to think about. And again, within a particular context, what are some of the things that I might need to know in reference for those skills that I feel like I could get better at, and how might my knowledge be improved in these areas. So it's a nice model. People like it. It's a lot of work, and can be something that can be quite reflective. People are then encouraged to set goals. We do use the SMART goals methodology, which is sort of appropriate to be very specific, measurable. Again, just an attempt to try and be able to hold people accountable and to be able to think about what's next. What's your next steps? How are you going to foster these professional development goals, and what does that mean? So the program provides a lot of information, a lot of guidance, a tremendous amount of peer support. They think about themselves, they think about what's happening in the organization, and they leave the program ready to be able to apply this information and to be able to move forward in a way that can make them a more effective leader.